Welcome back to Beginning Video Production. I'm Steven Schleicher, and in this lesson, I want to talk about the various stages of production. Now, in a basic production, we're talking about like a studio talk show or a variety show or something like that you're doing in the studio. We can look at 3 stages of production, maybe 4 stages, maybe 5 stages as you expand out. But the 3 stages are pre-production, production, post-production. It's pretty simple. By the time this lesson is done, you should have a pretty good overview of what happens in each of those stages. One thing to remember is Murphy's Law, and Murphy's Law says if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. And so one of the things that you need to do in the pre-production stage is plan for every eventuality. And that's what pre-production is through. Too oftentimes I see students rushing through pre-production and all of a sudden they're like, oh, I forgot a white balance, or oh, we forgot this piece of equipment, or oh, we didn't know that we were supposed to get this shot. And that's Murphy's Law in effect. So the more time that you can spend in pre-production, the better. However, in pre-production, generally, ideally, best case scenario, you should have about 1.5 times the duration of your shoot spent in pre-production or more. Sometimes you might be spending a year or more in pre-production just for a 3-month shoot. But in this class, I think it's a good idea to just kind of say a 1.5 weeks per every week of production. That's a good rule of thumb right there. So during pre-production, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about developing a concept. We're talking about establishing objectives. What is the point of this show or this piece that you're working on? And of course, you have to write the script. And in the writing stage of pre-production, you usually go through a couple of different stages, and we'll talk more about script writing and storytelling in a future lecture. We do want to focus on the treatment. You know, what is the overall approach that we're going to take on this story or this concept or this piece that we're doing. We're going to write out a rough script, get feedback. We're going to write a final script, and then we can move on to the next stage of pre-production after we have a script that everyone is fairly comfortable with. Now, keep in mind, the script writing is going to change throughout the production process. In fact, oftentimes on a movie set, you may find writers on set who are rewriting scenes or reworking dialogue to fit in any given situation. For this course, I would encourage you to use an application and a website called Celtics or Celtics, I don't know how you pronounce it, CELTX.com. This is a fairly robust system for writing your script, doing breakdowns, storyboards, budgets, just walking yourself all the way through the entire production process. I've used many different products over the years, from Final Draft to Scrivener and a whole lot more, but the one that I found that is probably the most robust and straightforward and kind of inexpensive for students is the Celtics program. Again, this is not a paid endorsement or anything like that, but I did want to point this out, that this is one that I think that you guys might enjoy, find useful, find yourself using throughout the next couple of years as you're going through these production courses. Going back to pre-production, after we have our script written, we need to go through and figure out what days are we going to shoot? What scenes are we going to shoot on which days? Where are we going to shoot? Who's taking care of the logistics for the location that we're shooting at? Do we have permissions? Do we have rights? Do we have contracts? Do we have the necessary gear to make sure that we can get out to this location and shoot effectively without wasting time? Of course, on the director's side, on the creative side, you're also developing storyboards. And storyboards are, I don't know, depending on how you like to work, storyboards can be a lifesaver or they can be the thing that ties you down. Personally, I like storyboards. It lets me plan in my head what kind of shot that I want to use. Is this a close-up? Is this a wide shot? How is the camera moving through this scene? And, you know, some directors rely on their storyboards religiously to the point where they don't want to deviate from that at all. I've heard stories that Alfred Hitchcock relied so much on his storyboards that if he knew that his crew were shooting what he saw in his storyboards, he never had to look through the viewfinder. Now, I'm not sure that that's an accurate story, but it certainly makes for a good story. But one of the great things about a storyboard is it serves as a great way to communicate ideas, your ideas, to the rest of the cast and crew. So if you're talking about a close-up and you're talking about a really tight close-up, and you draw that in your storyboard, or someone else is drawing that in your storyboard, then the entire cast and crew knows exactly what kind of shot you're looking for, and they can set up the camera to match your vision. It is awful if you say, okay, I want a close-up or an extreme close-up of an actor's face, and the rest of your crew is thinking, okay, this is the framing that I want, and then you come in and go, no, I wanted this kind of framing, which means they have to move the camera closer, maybe make a few lighting changes, so on and so forth, and so it can waste a lot of time. Now, the drawback to a storyboard is that oftentimes you can run into situations where directors are so religiously tied or rigorously tied to the storyboard that if they get to a location and it doesn't look how they envisioned it or how they planned it on their storyboards, they're lost. They don't know what to do. So you do need to be a little bit flexible with your storyboards, but a good storyboard is a great way to communicate your ideas to other people. Also in the pre-production stage, we're looking at budgeting. How are we going to get this money? How much is it going to cost to do this show or this shoot? Where are we going to get the money for that? Now, if you're working with a client, obviously you want to develop a budget that is going to meet their needs and within their means, but sometimes you may not have a client in mind, especially if you're doing something freeform and you need to go seek funding from outside sources, whether that be through a grant or through your station manager or through a studio executive. It doesn't matter. At some point, they're going to want to know how much does this cost, and they're going to want to see a budget for that. Also, the pre-production stage is where we hire our cast and crew. We will talk about hiring cast and crew in future lectures. And as I said, ideally, we want to, in this pre-production stage, allow 1.5 weeks per every week of shooting. So if you know that you're going to have a week to do a shoot, then 1.5 weeks should be spent in pre-production. Ideally, a little bit more than that. You'll find out more about that in just a moment. Once we're done with kind of all the scheduling and the logistics and the hiring of the cast and crew, then we can kind of move on to this subset of the pre-production stage that I like to call the setup and rehearsal stage. This is where you start doing set construction. This is where you're lighting your studio. This is where you're doing any kind of audio setup. If you've got any film or videotape that you need to roll into your production, you are preparing that stuff now. You also build any models and special effects in this stage. And then you can go and rehearse with your actors. I would recommend that you rehearse with your actors outside of the studio, because studio time is valuable, and if you're spending time in the studio rehearsing, that's money on your budget, where you could go and rehearse at your house, or you could find a small office space that you could rehearse in, especially for just rehearsing dialogue scenes. You don't need to be in that location to do that. In the case of a multi-camera shoot that you're doing inside of the studio, maybe you have some tech run-throughs where you're running through camera moves and camera placements, especially like in a sitcom, you need to know where all the cameras are going to be in relation to your actors as they appear in the various scenes. You might have a dress rehearsal or a run-through, and oftentimes in this stage, you are developing an edit decision list. Where are you going to cut? If you have any rough time codes or anything like that, you might start developing an edit decision list at this stage of production. Once you've done your setup and rehearsal, it's finally time to go live, or it's time to finally get this piece of production done and out of the way. And before we get into, production is where you actually shoot your piece. But there are multiple types of productions that you should be aware of. Obviously, you could do something that's live. News is done live. Most news is done live. And they have packages and other things that they're rolling in throughout the process. Not oftentimes that they have any kind of rehearsals, although anchors may be going through their scripts ahead of time before the program airs. Sometimes not at all, but we do have live productions. These are live to the air. We also have taped, or I don't know, we don't really use tape anymore, so maybe we're going to a hard drive or some kind of digital storage device, but I'm still going to call it taped. And so we have two types of production that we can have in this taped environment. We have live to tape, meaning that it's done live, kind of like this video right now is it's being recorded live to the disc, and then it'll be edited later, but we don't go back and do a whole lot of reshoots or anything like that. So we have live to tape, start to finish all the way through. We have taped in segments, where we record a little bit, we stop, we do some other setups, we may have to go back and reshoot a segment or a scene, and then we can continue, and then we go and edit all that together at the end. And then we have single camera film style. This is something that you might see in some situation comedies do this, some dramas do this on television. I don't want to date this video, but you could watch a lot of sitcoms or shows that are currently running on your drama shows especially, are often done single camera film style, meaning you shoot everything from one angle, you stop, you reset, you move the camera to the next camera angle that you want to get, you shoot your scene from there, then you move the camera again, shoot the scene from there until you have all your coverage so that you can edit it together. Usually you think of this as a wide, mediums, and close, or in a two-person setup, you have establishing shot, over the shoulders, internal reverses, and then you're done and out of there. More on that later on. Then you might also have, in some situations, instead of single camera film style, you might have multiple cameras each recording to a separate unit, videotape recorder of some kind. Sports, you might want to think of something like this, where every camera in a football game is being recorded so that you could have instant replay. Or maybe in an example of like a sitcom where you have 3 or more cameras on set, each of those are recording their own view of things, and then that gets edited later on. And then once you're done shooting, you move right into post-production, which is your final step before distribution. Here, the director is working with the editor to cut out all the bad parts and just leave the good stuff that eventually gets seen. This is often a very creative process. Post-production can last almost as long as pre-production, just depending on the situation. Oftentimes, though, you're looking at about a week for post-production for every week of production. So kind of a 1-to-1 ratio there. Not always the case. Some situations, especially if it's special effects heavy, you could be a year in post-production before something is ready to go. But if you're thinking about a sitcom, you might be looking at a post-production schedule that's about a week to get done, sometimes less. Every situation is different. That's why I'm not diving into specifics here, but I'm giving you a broad overview, because some people might be sitting there going, oh no, we spend 2 to 3 weeks in post-production for every week. Well, that's your situation, and that's not how every situation works. I've worked in environments where literally I prep a show for a couple of hours, I'll record a show for an hour, and then I have an hour, hour and a half, maybe 2 hours to do the post-production of that show before I have to post it and get it live to my audience or my listeners. So every situation is going to be different. I know some people that record the show directly, they don't make any edits, and then they just upload it, and it's out there and ready for everyone to see. So every situation is different. Just keep that in mind. But this has been kind of a broad overview of the 3 stages of production. Now, I want to stress again, I believe that pre-production is the most important stage of production. I know people get all caught up in going out and shooting something, or going out and recording something, or maybe you are someone who really, really thrives on the edit. But I need to stress again, pre-production, Murphy's Law, you want to avoid as many problems as you might possibly encounter. And that is why, if you only had 5 minutes to do a production from start to finish, and again, this is just imaginary, so we can all contemplate this and think about it in our heads and kind of really see the importance of pre-production. If you only had 5 minutes to do a production from start to finish, 3 of those minutes should be spent in pre-production. 1 minute in production, 1 minute in post-production. 3, 1, and 1. And so you can kind of scale that up. Think of that as maybe you have 5 weeks to get a project done, or 5 months to get a project done. Spend 3 months in pre-production, a month in production, and then a month in post-production. Just use that as kind of as a general guideline for you as you move forward in your productions. Again, 5-minute production, 3 minutes in pre-production. Pre-production is that important. That, I think, wraps it up for this broad overview of the 3 stages of production. You could count a 4th stage if you want to go set up in rehearsal. You could even do a 5th stage if you want to spend a lot of time in development hell, where you're going to be doing all your script writing and going around and finding potential actors who might be interested in your piece, or finding potential studios that might be interested in your piece, and you're pitching ideas. That stuff is kind of outside of, in my opinion, the 3 stages of production. But then once it's approved, then we get into the exciting stuff. If you have any questions, just let me know. I'd be happy to answer them, and I can't wait to talk with you again next time when we talk about story.